All right, good morning. Welcome to Jonathan Dickinson State Park. I'm Jim Howe, the Vice President of Audubon of Martin County, as well as a longtime volunteer here in the park, and I lead the scrub jay walk. The Florida scrub jay is found in Florida scrub only. It's Florida's only endemic species. In other words, it lives here and nowhere else. And we're going to go out this morning and hopefully find us some scrub jays and some other birds and let you guys see the scrub and the important things there. One of the things that Audubon did was to get these signs placed in the park that talk about our scrub community. And we have a lot of unique plants, rare wildlife, gopher tortoises live here, and we manage this system using fire prescribed burns. Our scrub jays need land, which burned relatively recently. On the other side, we talk about the scrub jays themselves. Scrub jays are pretty remarkable birds, and they live in a family structure. And one of the birds will be sitting out in the open, acting as a sentinel to tell the others about food, danger, other bird things. And so we hope to find some of them sitting up on these trees. I see a bird right up here. Let me take a look at it. You are wow, what are you? Beauty of birding is you get to look at birds and go, wow, what are you? And then you walk closer and hope to find out. Sure looks like a fledgling mockingbird. This park and the road that we're on right now were once part of a World War II military installation called Camp Murphy. This was once Camp Murphy Road, and after World War II, this site, which was originally built to teach people how to operate radar, was then turned over to the state parks, and in the 50s then, this park became really one of our state's jewels here in southeast Martin County. Let's look again. Yeah, we have this is almost certainly a fledgling mockingbird sitting up in that one spot, probably waiting for mom or dad to come back and feed it. Mockingbirds, loggerhead shrike, and scrub jays all can look very similar. They're very similar size, and we can generally tell by the angle they hold their tail and just how they hold themselves. Every bird is different. As we look for these birds, I'd like to point out we are in a big state park, and it's a multi-use facility. And here we have folks riding bikes, and some of our state employees. I believe that's our the park manager right up there, and they're working on these bike trails. We're going to stop right here, and I'll talk about the scrub itself. Now, this, believe it or not, is an old growth forest. This has been scrubland for hundreds, perhaps thousands of years, and the majority of these plants are actually quite old, and they burn quite regularly. Looking at some of these things like saw palmetto, this plant right here has probably burned to the ground dozens of times, but because of the way they can survive fire, they come right back up. And there are oak trees here. Believe it or not, if you don't know it, that's an oak tree over there covered up by some vines. And these scrub oaks can live hundreds of years and still be less than 20 feet tall. They burn to the ground and then they'll come right back. And when they do, scrub jays will then eat eat the acorns for food and use the dense foliage, which then grows, to nest inside of. This ecosystem is a unique place in the world. We talk about species going extinct. Well, there are millions and millions of species. The Earth only has a few thousand ecosystems, and when you lose an ecosystem, you lose everything that is inside of it. And one of the reasons that the scrub jay is now considered a threatened species in Florida is that 90% of the places that it lived, Florida scrub, have been removed. It's high and dry. It's a great place to build. And so people built on it. It's very difficult to build on the other two places that are famous in Florida, alligator swamps and beaches. It's tough to put buildings there, but boy, it's easy to build out here. And when they saw these kind of places, they decided, oh man, these are the places to build, and wound up removing almost 90% of the scrub jay's environment. And not just scrub jays, but all of these other things out here, excuse me, many of them live only here. So what I was talking about in ecosystems is that while this place has none of the, let's call it grandeur of, say, the Yosemite Valley and that ecosystem, this place is absolutely unique. Places like this upland water catch, there's a formal term that I don't recall, but listen, hear the bugs, the frogs. Those are the basic roots of our ecosystems. Those are the things our birds eat. And so this ecosystem, completely unique, it needs fire. And because people don't like fire in their neighborhood, we basically set this place on fire on a very tightly controlled schedule. And one thing that does, besides just keeping it down, is it lowers the fire load on the land. When the world burned itself, it was very random. It happened 10 years, 5 years, 150 years, and suddenly lightning would strike and burn what was there. We try to burn stuff every few years so that that load of dead material, when it does catch fire, we have a relatively low intensity fire that we hoped always to be able to control. We're kind of getting away from the controlled burn phrase because it's sort of an uncontrolled process. It's controlled chaos, and we do it under some very controlled conditions. And when we find we do it right, scrub jays come onto our lands, and they are an indicative species that show us that we are in fact managing this land properly. I believe I see one out in the scrub here. It appears to be it's another youngster of some species. Young birds have very few feathers on their heads, and the body size seems too big for their head. And that's what I'm seeing right here. The brightness of it. Gosh, I think we got another mockingbird there. And another thing, when you see a mockingbird like that, if you're looking at it, its tail will be at an angle like this. Scrub jays like to pull their tail back under their body, past I call that like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, and scrub jays would be more like 7. When I don't find birds, I stop and talk about individual plants, and here's a cool one. This one's called partridge pea, and it's a native. It can burn right to the ground. They have these really beautiful yellow flowers. They rarely get much taller than about this tall, and they're a scrub plant. Found very few places other than Florida scrub. I'm pretty sure they're in the mimosa family, and if you touch those, they'll... That's right, it won't do it on cue, but... One of the things I forgot to mention earlier was the here in our park we have a lot of purple martins, and one place they like to sit, there's a tree right here which is really old and dead and tall, and the purple martins will sit on that at this time of day, and the fact that they are not there now tells us they are moving on. What do we got right here, John? Looks like a couple of ibis. Looks like a couple of white ibis, the most common wading bird in Florida. See them here quite regularly. One thing about this spot, even though it's a scrub and there's about 100 birds who regularly are found in the scrub, we are standing under the Atlantic flyway. The Atlantic Ocean is less than a mile over here. And because of that, almost anything can fly over. It's truly remarkable. We've had about 375 species have been seen flying over. We got a scrub jay right here, John. It's up in this tree. Walk up here. I'm certain that is there. See it? See it? Hopped. He right in the sun too. Let's move. We're not going to get a film of that bird.
No.
So let's keep looking around here. There are about 70 of these birds in the park. We've got a researcher who comes in the spring and spends several months here finding all of the birds, banding as many of them as possible. And for that, we're very grateful to Audubon, Florida, and the folks out at Archbold Research Station. This is one of these scrub oak trees I was talking about. This tree could be hundreds of years old, gets burnt to the ground, immediately comes back up, and because it's a real old tree, can almost immediately, that's 2, 3, 4 years, begin producing the acorns that scrub jays use in the winter time. Like many other birds, they live on bugs in the summer. Two kinds of pine trees in the park. This is a slash pine tree. They've got very long needles. Most of these really tall trees that were here were also slash pine. And slash pine is actually sort of an invader out here in the scrub. Scrub typically has the sand pine tree. They have a very, very different ecology. And these things, when they're short like this, and are living out here in an area which burns regularly. At this size, they're pretty susceptible to fire. The bigger ones are not so much. There's a few sand pine over here, and we're not really close enough to show you the difference in the size of the needles, but they're just beautiful trees.
They're just going down.
Ooh, yeah, another scrub. Is that one there on the branch too? Let me see here. Yeah, that is a scrub jay. It is over here on this dead, I call him shank, and he's sitting on there. It's probably the offspring. The way the other one went down told me it was probably trying to feed the other one. So,
hold this for a second.
Sure.
You can be the cameraman for a second.
These are bedrock species, and not just here in the scrub ecosystem, but they're found throughout upland Florida. The gopher tortoise digs a burrow, can go back 20, 30 yards, and more than 300 species of animals have been found there, mostly insects, but also things like lizards, snakes, frogs. They use those on occasion to either live in, hide in, or even lay their eggs in. Small lizards like to put their eggs in this soft sand here at the entrance, which is also just exactly where the gopher tortoise would bury her own eggs, is in that apron is the exact name. I was just going to say that, and I have an issue where sometimes I can't put my finger on exact words. So if I ever seem to be reaching for a word, that's it. Another thing that's cool out here, this is saw palmetto, and these are the saw palmetto beans. They are really important for feeding raccoons, skunks, and other small animals. Raccoons, when that stuff is available, they'll eat almost nothing but those berries, and then they carry that seed inside of them and poop it out later, and that's what's probably spread all of these saw palmettos. This is a sable palm. I started to say sable, and it is the Florida state tree. It can take about 70 years to get to this size. They start out very small. Here's one right here. This is just leaving what we call grass stage. It'll then be a bush stage plant for another 10, 20 years. This plant right here is probably 10 years old. And then by the time it's this tall, it's 20. And this one could be at least 50 years old right here. And they're very well adapted to fire. It could lose every one of those leaves, but if that lead growth in the center stays alive, the tree will respond. If you look at its base, in fact, you can see the black, the fire remnants, the charring that this tree underwent when it had a fire come around it. We spotted some in the distance earlier. We've yet to really see any in the foreground, but you never know. One way we'll be able to tell is scrub jays and all birds have very distinctive flights based on their species and the way their wings are shaped and how their size and how they feed and the length of their legs. All of those things affect the way birds fly, and once you become practiced, you can recognize a bird just by its flight at distance. And so so we look for scrub jays because one of the things that they do, which is very, very distinctive, is they sit up on these trees as scouts, and if they see what they think is food, they do a drop, which once you've seen it, you think, oh, that's scrub jay the moment you spot it, because every bird has very specific behaviors to it, and without those behaviors, it's not able to feed or fly or swim or whatever that bird itself does. How are you guys doing? Looking for scrub jays? We are doing a virtual bird walk, looking for them. There were some back up over here. I did see some out over there. Did you see them over here early? When I first pulled up. Yeah, so I know they'll come to people along here especially, and we know for a fact there's about 70 of the birds in the park. Most of them are banded, and about 10 of them live right here. And my friend just posted. We typically will see one. These birds are communal group nesters. And so the leader, we call them sentinel, her actually right here, it's a her. And they sit up and they watch. And sadly right here, these birds have actually learned that people might feed them. And it's not good, but they'll then come down, bounce around your feet. I've got some shots of people taking a picture of a bird like this. But, and they'll try to land on you and the like. And that's why we have actually banned people feeding them. For years, people would give them peanuts and the like, which they would then bury, because their natural instinct is to take extra acorns and bury them for the winter time. And they're one of the smartest animals in the world. They can recognize themselves in the mirror, and they find upwards of 80% of the buried acorns. Some researchers believe they'd find them all if they just needed them all. That they probably bury more than they actually need. So they're cool little animals. They're very clever. Well, I hope you guys find some. Here's another plant I'd like to mention. This is a cool plant, and it's a member of a group of plants that I had never even heard of. This plant right here, it's called Hog Plum, and Hog Plum actually is a root parasite. Its roots are into this stand of scrub oak, which could be hundreds and hundreds of years old, as I mentioned. And here's this plant, and its roots are literally going over and stealing the liquids that these other plants have gotten out of the ground, and allows it to then grow. Now, it is parasitic, but it is not 100% parasite. Once it is established, it can actually live on its own. You see, it does have green. But that's one of the cool plants that we find out here in the scrub. And then John's about to stand on this other plant right here, which is also a pretty cool forb. here in Jonathan Dickinson State Park, we have very little grass. Everything here that looks like grass is actually a forb and has a single flower stalk during the year. And this small plant here is doing its thing. We've got about 150 or so species like that here in the park. Just a really, really wonderful place. This is a hog plum. You can see that it's got some, this is grapevine on top of it, but this is a hog plum. And the hogs, supposedly the hogs will eat these, and they're edible. I could eat this right now. I usually will eat one of them or so. I've been told they have a lot of silicates in them, and if you eat a lot of these, you can get sick. It can cause problems. So I'm not actually going to eat this, but this is a hog plum, and the small animals just love them. There are birds here, which we find all over North America. We have great horned owls and bald eagles, which both nest in this park, and both are distributed across essentially the entire continental United States. But we also have birds like scrub jay, and we have other birds which are pretty rare here in South Florida. We've recently reintroduced the brown-headed nuthatch to our park, which had been extirpated, locally extincted some time ago, and we're working on a long-term plan to reintroduce the red cockaded woodpecker. We have a lot of long-term work going on, and we're going to be putting in some nest boxes here in the short future, and hopefully then get some birds down here and start that process up of actually having another extirpated species reintroduced to our park. But although this was our scrub jay walk, Audubon and Martin County has done many other walks here in the park. We come to not just look for scrub jays, but we also come to look for Bachman's sparrow, which is found in our flatwoods. I think every birder knows you got to go to their environment if you want to find them. You want to see a seabird, you don't go to the desert, you go to the ocean. That's where you're going to find frigate birds, is out at sea. If you want to find land birds, you go to land. And so we go in other places in the park, in our flatwoods, and we find Bachman's sparrow down there, which are a relatively rare bird. They have very specific ecosystem requirements. I just heard a red belly. Did you hear it? Red belly woodpecker, like so many other birds, has a very unique call. The beauty of birding is, let's say you manage to learn the 300 species that are relatively common in eastern North America. Well, each of them has a call. Each of them has flight characteristics. Each of them is a little bit different. Do we have a scrub jay right there after all our walking?
No, this is that red belly. He was on that.
He's in that same tree again? There's a scrub jay. Or is that a mocker? Sure, could be. That's a scrub jay, John. We got a scrub jay right there in the parking lot where we just spent an hour walking away from. And you've lost a significant amount of the birds, so I don't see your feet. And what else? We're starting to get some other birds here too. And there's two. There's another one right here. It's mate. Hi, sweetie. How are you? I see the bands on this bird now. Yep. Typically in our park we have 4 bands. The older birds, they all have 2 and 2. This year's birds, we've been putting 3 on one, 1 on the other. It just, those bands, he's going to fly when this truck comes, I think. But what I was going to say was historically birds were banded with just the metal band. And that was, if we then had to hold on to that bird again, find its body or catch it in a net to be able to identify it. And when we put these multiple bands on, we can identify individual birds at pretty good distance. I see some bands on this bird. I saw a red one earlier, but if we were to record what those 4 bands are, we would be able to determine precisely where this bird was banded. And I'll bet you 20 to 1. When we looked that up, that bird was banded right here. Scrub jays almost never move from where they were born. If they can remain where they were born and stay on those lands, they will. And the one reason they take a while to move from their family group, they have to find an open piece of scrub that they could live in. And this isn't the simplest thing to do. And so they stay in these small family groups from 3 to 8 birds. Listen, that ta-da-da-da, do you hear that sound, John? That's the female leader. And here she comes. The female leader of this group does not have any bands. She will not, she's too smart to go in any of our traps. That's her, yeah, that's her right there. She has no bands, and she is the leader of this group. When she was born about 3 years ago, she essentially just took over. And one of the things about scrub jays is researchers have found they've got several very distinctive styles of personality. And these styles allow them to either exploit an existing range, like this bird is doing, or have the inner movement inside them. They've got an inner want to leave and go to somewhere else. And those two things are what drives scrub jay ecology. The ones who can survive here and will stay as long as they can and be the leader, and the others which will stick around just long enough until that I got to get out of here feeling. I know the feeling. I honestly believe these birds are so smart. There was one of them I was convinced knew me, and he would come and look at me. He had 4 bands. I first took his photograph about 7 years ago. These birds can live about 12 years. He now has just 1 band, and I have not seen him since, gosh, February or so. But he's been around here for years, and I think these individual birds recognize individual humans.
I wouldn't doubt it a bit.